Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome, brothers and sisters, back to a video here on the IREP channel. I'm joined today, mashallah, by my beautiful brother Imran Hussein and Khalid. I don't want to make a mistake with your surname, bro. It's a little bit twisty for me, but Khalid, jazakallah khair for coming on. Now, we've brought you on here today, Khalid, to ask you about your article that you've written. So, I don't want to spoil anything. I just want to bring you first and foremost. What inspired you to write this article? What was it that one day you were sitting there and you thought, you know what, we need something like this? Bismillah.
Right. So this article is known as One Beyond the Many. And what came to my mind is actually thinking about this idea that which I felt could be common within the youth, that nowadays people have forgotten or moved away so much away from religion and moved towards new age spirituality and sometimes towards these kind of ideas, that they forgot the whole boundary between what monotheism is and what other isms and schisms are. So this article, if I can bring it on the screen,
Mhm.
is called One Beyond the Many, is trying to actually establish monotheism in a new way or in a modern way, where like these kind of youths who, when they come across, in for instance, they come across like, okay, there are extraordinary beings that might exist, or NHI that might exist, or ghosts do exist, they think, or they can, it could be a potential doubt that can come to their mind, that what if there is nothing like religion? What if there is only these beings and they are the controllers of the universe? So I wanted to address this article starting from an I start this article by giving an imaginary scenario where there's a young chap who is watching on the screen that there a video of UFOs, and then he also recalls a few days back his colleague talks about some of his family members having an experience with like a ghost or some NHI experience. So the doubt comes to his mind that, what if these beings are the one that are actually controlling the universe, and the idea of monotheism is just some flimsy idea that we have created. So I
Mhm.
wanted to start from this idea, and this is what I had in mind, that I want to deeply address this idea of
Yes.
making this distinction between a monotheistic god and any other extraordinary being that exists. So the subtitle of this article itself is why ghosts, aliens, and extraordinary beings can't replace God, and
Mhm.
how they end up pointing to him. So I wanted to show that even if you, let's say, if you have some experience of some extraordinary being, or if you want to even hypothetically imagine that extraordinary beings exist, they don't challenge God's existence. Rather, you need God's existence to even make sense of them. That's
Yeah.
what the primary goal I had in mind in
Yeah.
writing this
That's
article.
at the heart of the article. What I really love about that actually is I think you've really got your finger on the pulse. What's happening right now is this type of resurgence of new way of approaching things and thinking differently about what you've grown up as a tradition, right? So tradition being if you are one of the blessed few that grew up in a family of Muslims, right, who's practicing, and then this type of idea comes to you and you start exploring it, it's going to really be mind blowing, especially if you're not that well educated as a Muslim. I think that's one of the issues, some people may face now. So you're framing your mind as somebody else going through this experience, and I think that's going to be invaluable because it really, as someone like myself, it really immerses me into the feeling of what they're going to go through, and it also highlights one really key thing about human beings, that is fitra. We do have this natural disposition to want to worship or to find answers or to understand our creation and where we come from. And unfortunately, this is just another avenue where people think that they're going to find the answers they're looking for. So, how did you, once you put yourself in that frame of mind, where did it lead you?
Subhanallah. So I think you hit the spot directly, because what did I do is, you can see on the screen, I also added a picture there where, there's this guy who's looking at videos of UFOs and getting confused about reality. So I try to build one from the base, and, I divided the article into 5 sections. And the first section was where I wanted to actually hit the fitra itself. So the first section of this article actually is known as why extraordinary beings fail as ultimate explanation. And I start with some research into cognitive science, which talks about how the human being itself, I, even as a child, want to seek explanations in an ultimate sense, and the most simple and ultimate sense. And if that is the case, then monotheism fits this category better than any other explanation, because when you have to go to an ultimate explanation, you can't have a polytheistic understanding or an understanding of some extraordinary beings that can adequately provide you an ultimate explanation. So this is what I want to hit within the first section. And what I cover in the first section is more about how within cognitive science, sometimes you find a distinction between extraordinary beings and what they are able to provide as an explanation for reality, and God altogether, or a creator altogether. And I had a discussion specifically on this topic with Dr. Justin Barrett, and I wanted to highlight his work into this, where he explains, he gives the example of, let's say you have an extraordinary being, like his pet, a spirit of his pet parrot, like parrot is basically an animal which looks like a mouse, and he said that the spirit of that parrot, it can only provide an explanation for, like, maybe something that, he got missing from his place here and there. That's all it can provide. Whereas God as an explanation is the ultimate explanation which can explain all of reality. So he coins this term as inferential potential. So his argument was that these beings have very limited inferential potential, whereas God has ultimate inferential potential. So from that perspective, he says that these beings will have localized inferential potential, and our fitra demands an ultimate inferential potential. So I argued some aspects within cognitive science that actually try to highlight that our cognitive mechanisms are at least more biased towards these kind of ultimate explanations. So these belief in these beings cannot be an ultimate explanation. They cannot provide ultimate inferential potential. So this is where you would find a distinction between our cognitive apparatus, where there would be a section where God is best fitting that criteria rather than these beings. So this is what I wanted to highlight in some sense, from an intuitive aspect, why belief in God is something that is more satisfactory than belief in any other supernatural being. So this is what I want to highlight in the first section. I cover a few things else as well, that all over the world. I've covered a few surveys where we see that how human beings have this natural tendency to actually come to a conclusion of belief in a supreme being, like a creator God. Even there are some studies where they say that even when in Buddhism, where they don't have any belief in a creator God, still there are 40% of Buddhists that sometimes implicitly believe in a creator God without their theology allowing them to believe in something like that. So that's a powerful case for the fitra, which drives us to go towards those kind of explanations, which these beings cannot explain. So this is what I want to highlight. And another thing that I wanted to address was Dr. Justin Barrett himself actually talks about how belief in God does not generally comes from an experience that you had sometime. Rather, it is an explanation that makes sense of all of your experiences. Whereas when it comes to belief in these beings, it might come, or it might come into your belief apparatus because you had some kind of experience sometime. So these two, there's another distinction that we can make from that angle as well.
Yeah. I would even add to that as well, Akhi. Sometimes people who do believe in God and have phenomenal experiences, they don't get swayed. Why? Because as you said, the belief in God is innate, is internalized from a very young age. I myself believed in God even when I was a non-Muslim from a very young age, I even used to speak to God, and I never expected a word back. I wasn't like a delusional person where I'm like, God talks to me. Rather, I knew it was a one-way thing. I knew God was way far beyond, responding to me in a primitive human way, right, through a voice or something. But there are people out there who have had phenomenal experiences and it didn't sway them. It didn't take them away from belief. So I think you're right to argue from that position. It's a very strong one, mashallah.
Alhamdulillah. And then, there's one more thing, the moral aspect that I try to cover, but since we don't have time to cover everything, anyone who's interested, they can definitely read the article. I move on to the second section, which again goes into some analytical philosophy. And I think this is the central argument that I want to build on, is what we find in analytical philosophy. Now, first we try to cover from an intuitive aspect. This is more from a rational, inferential perspective. How we can come to the conclusion that all of reality has to be explained by a necessary being. All of reality has to be dependent, and then there has to be an ultimate independent foundation. Now, theologians and philosophers, when they talk about God and a supreme being from that sense, or at least a monotheistic idea of a God, we consider God to be that independent foundation. So any other being that we talk about has to ultimately be dependent on that independent being that is God. So this is making a more bigger distinction using contemporary analytical philosophy, trying to show how God would be very distinct and different from these beings, and these beings would ultimately be dependent on God. So there would be a clear distinction there. And what I wanted to highlight was I had a discussion with one of the leading philosophers in the world, who's Joshua Rasmussen, and he tries to build a complete argument. He said the ultimate foundation. I take a thought experiment and imagine, like, that there's a ultimate, like, there's a being that comes in, like, imagine a three-headed dragon, and claims to be God, claims to be the ultimate foundation of reality. Dr. Joshua Rasmussen gives a criteria and shows how the limits, because any being, any extraordinary being that comes in front of you would have some or the other limits. Like, let's say a three-headed dragon will have three heads and, let's say, golden eyes. So those limitations, or the characteristic that it will have, will itself determine its limitation and show that it is dependent. So why not three, instead of three head, why not four head and five head? So that itself, any characteristic that it has would be contingent characteristics, and those contingent characteristics itself can only be explained by an independent foundation. So from that perspective, any being that appears in front of you and claims to be God, I mean, its own characteristics would actually go against him and defy its claim in that sense. That is what I wanted to highlight.
This is going to be very helpful for especially young people, bro, especially young Muslims, because there's a lot of interest these days amongst the youth, to engage in these types of beliefs about other beings and entities, and, practicing CE5 in certain places in the Muslim world and crazy stuff like this. So what do you hope this article will do, bro, for these people?
Yeah, so what my hope here is that if they actually grasp this particular section, they would clearly make a distinction between the contingent and the necessary, and they would have a strong sense of how understanding that, okay, this cannot be the ultimate foundation like God. Like, if you have an experience of like a particular being or something, you can clearly see that, okay, that cannot be God. That itself, its own characteristics would actually cry out for its dependency on an ultimate independent foundation. I think this can actually fortify this understanding of understanding God to be in this sense non-anthropomorphic. You cannot have these kind of anthropomorphic limited qualities that you can ascribe to God. So that would reinforce the idea of monotheism that our tradition, from an Islamic perspective, what we have, and that is what this argument can fortify. That is what I believe.
I think it's beautiful that you validate the idea to explore, right? Because we've got to accept that there's many weak Muslims out there, and even non-Muslims who don't understand the difference between God and these things, and that's why they're exploring. And the idea of exploring, if you already have the knowledge, that's a negative thing. But if you don't know, this is what you're going to do. This is going to be a natural progression. You hear about these creatures that are visiting Earth allegedly, and you explore what's available of information out there. Your article, I think what it does, okay, you've explored that, but look, this is some of the pitfalls you might fall into, and it takes the person on a little bit of a journey to understand truly what matters in terms of seeking something phenomenal. And I think there's nothing. Now, I've said this before in many times I've spoke on this topic, that for me personally, there's nothing more phenomenal than and a greater enigma than the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it is something that, I constantly get, reminded of how great and fantastic it is. So people are searching for that mystery, searching for that discovery. I think you're going to find it in Quran more than you are there. And this type of article, bro, kind of draws people into that way of thinking and looking at something far greater than perhaps a few lights in the skies or a little bug-eyed being, appearing in front of them, but rather, seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the sublime and the irresistible. So, Jazakallah khair. Anything else you want to add there, brothers?
Yeah, maybe I'll just try to cover the three sections very swiftly. So the next section is not an independent argument in itself, but rather what I wanted to cover in this aspect was how within the first section we try to cover this intuitive aspect. Second, we try to use philosophy, analytical philosophy, and come to the same conclusion. Now the third aspect is going back into anthropology, and I think this is going to be one of the most interesting sections of the article. Is what I try to show is that humanity has always, if you try to go back in the past, see that they believe in a supreme creator, and that you can find remnants in so many different cultures all over the world. In fact, I also highlight how having extraordinary being is not a challenge to the idea of a supreme being or in a monotheistic tradition, because I had a discussion with Dr. Winfred Cordevan, and he explained how every monotheistic culture that he's gone through has the existence of extraordinary beings like angels, jinns, or diamonds, or whatever. But there is a supreme creator, and that supreme creator has a different role, and these beings have a different role. So, cultures in the past, if you see, there are many polytheistic cultures, but if you try to go back and see within their genealogy, you find that in the past they'll have remnants of monotheism somewhere down the line.
Allah.
And one interesting pattern that we see that I wanted to highlight, which is very interesting, and this would be the end of this article, I think, is that Dr. Winfred Cordevan himself and even Jerry Coughlin, they argue that when you see many different cultures, you would find that some cultures, they did go into polytheism and worship of other limited beings. But what used to happen is that they are worshipping these polytheistic, worshipping these limited and limited beings. But when any calamity used to strike, a big calamity where their life is on the line or they have a lot to lose, they intuitively used to feel that these extraordinary beings can only provide limited help, and they used to forget them and then go back to worshipping the single creator. Because at times when calamity strikes, they start feeling that this is where the limited beings cannot help me, I have to go back to God. So this is what we find in the people of a particular tribe in Kenya, what they used to do, and this is very interesting. So when a very big storm comes in, they used to seek help from spirits and extraordinary beings. But when a storm comes in, they forget all of the beings, they start worshipping the supreme being, and they even call the spirits and these things, and they say that you also worship this being because only this being can help us in this time. This shows how that human beings intuitively and in some sense cultures they understand that these beings do exist, but they are limited and their help is also limited. So when we face a calamity, as the Quran talks about, we have this verse in the Quran where like, when a calamity strikes and they stop associating God partners with God, and they worship Allah alone. But when he gets them back to the land, they again start associating partners with him. So this is what we actually find in many different cultures. But Brother Jerry also gives us many other examples. And what I did is take a modern phenomenon, I try to add it with what can happen in today's time as well. Like, for example, if a person is the people are on a ship and they don't care about God because they think that they can rely on technology and their own understanding. Let's say a storm comes in and their antenna is not working. Let's say their any kind of technology, but their GPS is stopped working. They have nothing now. They would actually sincerely go back and seek help. That God save me, help me. Okay. So what happens is because now they the idea of technology also they have is very similar to idea of relying on an extraordinary being. When you actually see that they cannot help, you forget them and you go back to God. So I just wanted to make a parallel between if limited beings help or provide you something, that is also limited, just like technology or anything else that we rely on as human beings. But in the end, what we can as a lesson derive is that if only the ultimate can provide you can help you in any aspect of your life, whereas limited beings will only provide you limited help. This is what I wanted to touch on.
MashaAllah, tabarakallah. Bro, this is a fascinating topic of research. I think that, by the sounds of it, you really enjoyed looking into it. And hopefully our brothers and sisters out there will benefit from it in humanity as well as in Islam. And jazakallah khair for explaining it for us, bro. Anything else you want to add before we sign off?
Yes, just very brief summary is that fourth section was just talking about Islamic theology, how Islamic theology actually integrates all of these evidences that we find independently, and how Islamic theology does not have a problem with these kind of extraordinary beings, but rather it gives you the groundwork to actually make sense of extraordinary beings, and that does not challenge the theology, does not challenge God's existence. And the fifth section that I wanted to cover is actually very briefly is what I took from an historical practical perspective and from a philosophical perspective, how if you want to investigate truth, so let's say a person has to actually investigate the truth for what it is, like, about these extraordinary beings. What I wanted to highlight is that first you need to have an understanding of truth itself, like what true it, like if does truth exist, is truth objective or not. And this is where I took some works of Roger Trigg and Juliano Keller, philosopher, where they highlight that how monotheism is the only ground where you can actually make sense of truth. So even if you want to actually investigate, that this is the main argument of the article, is if you want to investigate the truth of extraordinary beings, you actually have to believe in monotheism. Without monotheism, you cannot even make sense of truth itself. So if you want to believe that there is a truth out there, then we have to find it. You have to ground that truth in monotheism, and then you are able to actually make sense of objective truth altogether. So this was one of the main arguments to highlight that if you are interested in even investigating extraordinary being, you need to have this objective understanding of truth, which monotheism provides the best groundwork for even having a concept of truth in a meaningful way. So this is where the article is, and I end the article with this idea of how when this article can give this person this kind of robust criteria where he does not have to, his theology or his understanding of God does not get challenges by experiences of extraordinary beings, but rather now he has a strong foundation where now any kind of extraordinary being, extraordinary experience, or any kind of hypothetical scenario also does not make him challenge his understanding of God or his theology. Basically, this is the entire article, and this is what I conclude.
If anything, it just strengthens. Yeah, if anything, it just strengthens our approach to all this, and actually brings us closer to Allah. And on that note, brother, if you don't mind, I will sign off from here. So, Jazakallah khair for explaining that, my brother. Man, I bless you. And, hopefully we'll cover more of your articles soon, inshallah ta'ala. And brothers and sisters, you can get this on the IREP website, I believe it's going to be on, yeah?
Yes, inshallah. Jazakallah khair.
And elsewhere. Jazakallah khair, my brother. Man, I bless you, Khalid. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.